Hey there, fellow travelers. Welcome to the Tolkien Road, episode 359. In this episode, we're continuing our journey through the Fall of Númenor by exploring the rise of Ar-Pharazôn, Númenor's last king, and his confrontation with Sauron. Before we get started, I'd like to give a double up air five to our amazing fellowship. Stick 'em up, fellowship. 3, 2, 1. Whoopsh. Very nice. Special thanks to this episode's executive producers, John R., Kaitlyn of Tea with Tolkien, SaberSystems, Melkor27, and KG. Also, a shout out to those celebrating their fellowship anniversary in December of 2023, Andrew T., KDW, Brian O. the First, Emilio P., Margaret L., Shannon S., and Zeke F. Thank you all so much for sticking with us over the years. Join the Fellowship of the Road by visiting patreon.com/TolkienRoad. When you join the Fellowship of the Road, it helps us to keep on evering on and land you some cool perks along the way. Learn more at patreon.com/TolkienRoad. If you're watching, hit that like button. Don't forget to subscribe and let us know what's on your mind in the comments below. Finally, attention binge listeners, subscribe, rate, and review us on iTunes or the platform of your choice. If you are a 5-star fan of the Tolkien Road, you can really help us out by heading over to iTunes or your preferred source for the show and dropping us a rating and review. When you do that, it helps get the word out about the Tolkien Road, which helps us to keep on evering on. All right, well, in this episode, we examine the figure of Ar-Pharazôn, the last of Númenor's kings, and a figure so great that he seems to inspire fear even in the heart of Sauron. The original sources for this portion are primarily Unfinished Tales, Lord of the Rings appendices, Akalabaith, The People of Middle-earth, The History of Middle-earth, Volume 12, The Lost Road, The History of Middle-earth, Volume 5, and The Letters of J.R.R. Tolkien. Interesting little addition with The Lost Road there. That is The History of Middle-earth, Volume 5. We haven't, I don't think that's been included so far in any of the sources, but there's a little portion of that that's included here. So that's interesting, and it's interesting because The Lost Road is really, that's the volume that deals with the original story of Númenor, like the very first version of the story that Tolkien wrote sometime in the late 30s. So just a little interesting note that I thought I'd mention there. All right, well, the chapter begins with the figure of Tar Miriel, the only child of Tar Palantir, and the one to whom the scepter should have fallen upon his death. Her name, Miriel, means jewel daughter in Quenya, and she was born in second age 3117 and should have acceded to the throne in 3255 at the age of 138. Now, you might quibble and say actually she did accede to the throne, but she didn't hold on to the throne, or, Ar-Pharazôn took it over immediately, but, kind of technicalities there. But, she should have been the next ruler of Númenor, the third or fourth ruling queen after Tar Palantir, but she was not. She, in effect, was not Ar-Pharazôn. So she was taken in marriage against her will by her first cousin Ar-Pharazôn, who usurped the scepter of Númenor from her and ruled Númenor in her stead. And that we dealt a little bit with that in the last episode. Kind of interesting little ambiguities about whether she may have, really had some kind of an attraction to Ar-Pharazôn when they were younger. He was this great figure, very powerful, commanding figure, and there seemed to be details and different snippets here and there that indicate that there may have been sort of a love triangle going on with the person that she was maybe supposed to marry, and her, but she had this, was kind of drawn to Pharazôn. But anyway, the final result of it all is that she was supposed to be the next queen, and really, even though she is in title, perhaps, she is not the ruler. It's really Pharazôn who takes her in marriage against her will, and it's even worse in the idea that they are in fact first cousins. So do with that what you will, in the fact that she actually had some kind of attraction to him, but maybe it was like, okay, but this is not something that should happen, but Pharazôn makes it happen anyway. All right, so as far as Pharazôn goes, it says he is mightiest and proudest, no less than the kingship of the world is what he desires. Pharazôn, his name means golden in Adunaic, and really he's this picture of great hubris matched with great power, matched with the greatest power of any man on earth at that time, which is, when you think about it, a really dangerous combination. So Pharazôn, he usurps the throne. He's in theory, he's perhaps in line, if things hadn't worked out with the descendant of Tar-Palantir, because his brother, or Palantir's brother, was the father of Pharazôn, but really, with Miriel in the picture, she should have been the ruler. We get this, just take the very name Golden, it's like you kind of think of like golden boy, like just like, he's maybe full of himself, or he's been taught to be full of himself. But we'll come back to, maybe a few details about his upbringing that are particularly interesting that indicate that maybe he wasn't always, as bad as he became. That maybe that wasn't necessarily the trajectory he had to be on. We'll come back to that in a minute. Well, we learn about the elf friends, the Elendili, and their resistance towards Pharazôn. We know that during the reign of Tar-Palantir, even though we don't know many details about it, there was a civil war. There was a lot of civil strife during that period of time. And it was really pitted between the king's men, and who during the reign of Tar-Palantir, I guess that was kind of a misnomer. But in general, the king's men are the ones who want to take Númenor away from, the kind of moorings of tradition of their friendship with the Blessed Realm and with the elves, and kind of go their own course, really, assert the place of Númenor, kind of this sense of like, this like Ubermensch idea of, the Númenorians, right? That they're these great people. They live longer, and they deserve to dominate, right? Versus the elf friends who want to keep Númenor, tied to its historical moorings, to the traditions of the past, to this place of more of greatness, but of humility and greatness, right? So the elf friends are the ones who resist. They continue to resist the policies of Ar-Pharazôn. Let's read this passage here. The Elendili, elf friends, or the faithful, alone were not subservient to Ar-Pharazôn or dared to speak against his wishes, and it became well known to all in that time that Amandil, the lord of Andunier, was head of their party, though not openly declared. Therefore Ar-Pharazôn persecuted the faithful, stripping them of any wealth that they had, and he deprived the heirs of Valandil of their lordship. All right. So the elf friends are persecuted by Ar-Pharazôn for their resistance and are deprived of the lordship of Andunier. Remember, this lordship of Andunier, we go back and this person, Valandil. Valandil was the child of Silmarion. This is going back many, many generations into the first millennium of Númenor's existence. And if you'll recall, Silmarion was the oldest child of one of the kings of Númenor, but the throne, the rules for a ruling queen had not yet been affirmed. That wouldn't happen until later in history. And so even though she was the eldest, she was not given the throne. Her brother was given the throne, and her son Valandil. So they created this this lordship of Andunier, and Valandil was the first of these lords. Valandil being the son of Silmarion. So that's where this idea of them being deprived of the lordship of Andunier comes from. So Pharazôn, seeing their resistance, deprives them of this title, this this lordship of Andunier, and really, if you remember, let's look at the map again. Andunier is really like this place that's pretty far away in terms of Númenorian geography. Let me get rid of the Kindle there. Pretty far away from the from the seat of power, which is Armanelos. And it's over here on the far western, tip of the northwestern promontory of Númenor, the northwestern peninsula. So this is where the seat of this lordship has historically been, and they will be deprived of this, and we'll learn a little bit more about what happens with them in just a moment here. All right, so we learned something interesting, and that is that Amandil, who was the present lord of Andunier, Amandil and Pharazôn were actually dear friends in their youth. It says they were friends ere his father had corrupted him. Meaning, I would assume Pharazôn's father had corrupted him. So perhaps Pharazôn was not fated to turn out this way. He was friends with Amandil, who we'll find is a, very good figure. Has maybe the characteristics of the traditional Númenorian. Is maybe this icon of what the Númenorian still could be, even in this late age. But Amandil and Pharazôn were apparently friends as young men. So. And it's Pharazôn's father who really corrupts him. So even when the lordship of Andunier is taken from Amandil and his heirs, and they're forced to dwell in Romena, right, which is the port close to Armanelos, Amandil is not significantly harmed by any of this, right? Amandil is actually kind of held in esteem even by the kingsmen of Númenor, right? Just in general, by Númenorian society, he's held in high esteem. So even though he is maybe in this, seen as the head of this dissenting party, he's still viewed as this great figure and one that most Númenorians tend to respect. So Pharazôn is not yet at the point where he's willing to, maybe completely squash this figure, Amandil, who was his friend as a child, and who, is this respected figure. He just wants to bring him, close, right? Keep your friends close and your enemies closer, as they say. So I suppose that's Pharazôn's tactic here. Whether Amandil is his friend or his enemy, he needs to keep him close. So he brings him to Romena. So no longer do they dwell in Andunier, within vision, perhaps, of the Blessed Realm. And that, I would imagine, is punishment, punishment enough towards, persecution enough towards these figures. All right. Another quick side note. I know I've mentioned this in the last few episodes, but to me, this is it's very disappointing to me, among many things that I find disappointing about the Rings of Power, the TV show. We don't get any picture or any idea, at least through this first season, that Amandil and Pharazôn were friends. In fact, when Elendil shows up, Elendil will find is the son of Amandil, and Pharazôn has no idea. He seems to have no idea who Elendil is, and Elendil doesn't really seem to be like, you should know because you and my dad were best friends. There's no indication of this. In fact, Amandil isn't even a figure so far in the show. So I just think this is another missed opportunity, right? It's to kind of show this interesting relationship, this interesting dynamic between this figure of Pharazôn and Amandil, and the fact that they perhaps were friends when they were younger, but they have grown apart because of the realities of power and the exalted figures that they both are. All right. There's a long portion at the end of this particular chapter that deals with the change in the Númenorians, and this is from the Waldman letter. This letter this snippet well summarizes the change in Númenor's people that we have witnessed over the course of the series. I won't rehash it here, but it's certainly worth reading and considering as part of the larger Waldman letter. I kind of feel like we've been covering, a lot of what's said there throughout the course of this series. So all I'll say is, like, if you've never read the Waldman letter, or if it's been a long time since you read it, it's worth reading again. It just really lays out, that at a high level, that trajectory of the Númenorians over the course of their history in a very succinct way, sort of the spiritual progression of what happens to them, the spiritual downfall, if you will. All right. So we move ahead a little bit. We've been dealing with the usurpation of Ar-Pharazôn of the throne. So we move ahead to the year 3261. Ar-Pharazôn by now has been king of Númenor for 6 years, and let's read a little bit about what Sauron is up to in his own mind. Now, let me share my Kindle here. Now Sauron, knowing of the dissension in Númenor, thought how he might use it to achieve his revenge. He began therefore to assail the havens and forts of the Númenorians and invaded the coastlands under their dominion. As he foresaw, this aroused the great wrath of the king, who resolved to challenge Sauron the Great for the lordship of Middle-earth. All right. So Sauron is up to something. He knows somehow he knows of this dissension between the King's Men and the Elf Friends in Númenor, and he thinks to himself, how can I use this to achieve my revenge? The bad actors of the world, I think, sense this intuitively, that they can use division amongst a certain people to sow to sow seeds that will, be to their advantage over time, right? Certainly, we see this in the Silmarillion with Melkor. He sows seeds between the Noldor, amongst the Noldor, and uses this to his own advantage. And Sauron really, I think, learned these tactics, these strategies well from his master once upon a time. So what does he do? He assails the havens and forts of the Númenóreans and invades the coastlands under their dominion. This really upsets Pharazôn, right? And I think that was really Sauron's tactic all along, right? Is it so important that he, what's Sauron's endgame here? Is it just about the domination of these things, right, of these places, or is it really about the destruction of Númenor? And I think that's really the big thing that he has in mind. It's like, how can I draw Pharazôn out towards me and set things in motion such that I can really destroy Númenor? Not simply make gains against Númenor, but that I can actually destroy Númenor, right? He's going for all of it here. And this is that interesting note I was going to mention from, that I mentioned earlier from the Lost Road about, really this deals with who Sauron is. So let's read this as well. Mariners of Númenor brought rumor of him. Some said that he was a king greater than the king of Númenor. Some said that he was one of the gods or their sons set to govern Middle-earth. A few reported that he was an evil spirit. Perchance Morgoth himself returned. But this was held to be only a foolish fable of the wild men. The Lord sent messages to the king and spake through the mouths of wise men and counseled him against his mission. For they said that Sauron would work evil if he came. All right, so some people are kind of sensing that this is, that Sauron is up to more than simply, attacking certain holdings of the Númenóreans in Middle-earth, that he's trying to draw the king, Pharazôn, into something. But, we've learned of Pharazôn that he is this very prideful figure, and so, prideful figures often have certain buttons that can be pushed against them, and they will not. They become blind to maybe the bigger picture, and that's really what's going to happen with Pharazôn here. All right, so let's read about what happens next. So Sauron, or let's discuss what happens next. Sauron taunts Ar-Pharazôn, thus baiting him, and what does he do? Sauron declares himself the king of men. Now, Pharazôn, what does he want to be? Well, he wants to be no less than the king. He wants no less than the kingship of the world. So if you have Sauron here just declaring himself the king of men, right? Well, Pharazôn's like, wait a minute, I'm going to be the king of men on my way to being the king of the world. I want the kingship of the whole world. So we can see how Sauron is baiting Pharazôn into some kind of a confrontation. This further fills Ar-Pharazôn with pride and lust for power. He will claim the title King of Men for himself. And so Pharazôn raises this great fleet, this great armada, journeys across the ocean to the shores of Middle-earth, and he lands at Umbar, right? Umbar being in, kind of south of Gondor, the coastland south of Gondor. He lands there. He finds it pretty much, abandoned, at least abandoned as far as Sauron's forces goes. Now, it sounds a little ghostly. It almost sounds like maybe even the Númenóreans who once lived there no longer live there. So maybe Sauron's forces kind of like utterly destroyed all of it and then pulled back. But Sauron draws Pharazôn's forces towards the land of Mordor, really right up to his doorstep. And so Ar-Pharazôn marches upon Sauron's holdings and issues his challenge. And here's what happens. This is almost eerie. And Sauron came. From his mighty tower of Barad-dûr he came, and made no offer of battle. For he perceived that the power and majesty of the kings of the sea surpassed all rumor of them, so that he could not trust even the greatest of his servants to withstand them. And he saw not his time yet to work his will again with the Dunedain. And he was crafty, well skilled to gain what he would by subtlety when force might not avail. Therefore he humbled himself before Ar-Pharazôn and smoothed his tongue, and men wondered all that he said seemed fair and wise. So Sauron humbles himself, right? Sauron draws, you're expecting this huge confrontation, and what does Sauron do? He just surrenders, right? He surrenders and says, hey, I'm yours, right? You win. All right. Now, we can all kind of see it developing, right? Sauron is, by surrendering like this, he's going with Pharazôn. He's saying, I'll go with you back to Númenor and be your prisoner there. I can be kind of like this, great example of your power because I'm your prisoner. He's playing Ar-Pharazôn's pride against him. And so that's how Sauron will come to Númenor, right to the very heart of the kingdom of Númenor. And how this is really the first step in enacting his great plan of revenge against the Númenorians. A plan perhaps 3,000 years in the making. You may say about a little over 1,500 years in the making. But this is how Sauron is going to set in motion this great plan that he has concocted within his own mind. And the chapter ends with this little snippet from the History of Middle-earth, Volume 12. This is a hard doom, said Sauron, but great kings must have their will, and he submitted as one under compulsion, concealing his delight, for things had fallen out according to his design. Oh, this is a hard doom. Gosh, you got me. You win. But great kings must have their will, right? He said knowingly. He's tickling. He begins this process of tickling the ears of Pharazôn by saying, "Great kings must have their will." And this is the thing that he's going to repeat to Pharazôn: "Great kings must have their will," to try to get Pharazôn to do the things that are in his least interest. All right, but seem to be in his greatest interest to him. All right, well, there's a couple of pencil sketches associated with these two chapters. The first is at the beginning of 3255, that section, and this is a profile of whom I will assume is Ar-Pharazôn as a younger man, a powerful man. We see perhaps what looks to be his greatness, and then we have a picture at the beginning of 3261, a pencil sketch, I would assume again, of Ar-Pharazôn looking perhaps a little more haggard, but no less intimidating, a little older. Now, these are both interesting pictures. I will say I'm surprised to see the beards. Númenorians not really supposed to have beards, but perhaps there's an explanation for that. I don't know, but in my mind, Númenorians shouldn't have beards per Tolkien's own stipulation. And this really stems from the fact that they have elvish blood within them, and that's a kind of a dominant strain. All right, so in closing, what do we make of the story of Ar-Pharazôn thus far? Perhaps it is that when you choose to play the dangerous game of power, there is always someone who is 2 steps ahead of you, even when you believe you have the upper hand. This is certainly the story of Ar-Pharazôn, who for all of his might is clearly engaged in a strategic battle with a mind greater than his, and perhaps any man's. It is perhaps why the Númenorian rejection of Ilúvatar, the Valar, and the Eldar is so tragic, because they were the very great powers that might have come to their aid against a mind like Sauron's, great spiritual powers with minds and wills to match other great spiritual powers. Yet choosing to go at their own, they play right into his grasp, giving him unprecedented access to the very heart of the island kingdom that he was so very hungry to destroy. All right. As always, keep this correspondence coming. We'll do our best to respond to you somehow and at some point. Nothing to hit this week, but always looking forward to hearing more from you guys. All right, don't forget to stop by TrueMythsPress.com for great merch like super styling and comfy Tolkien Road t-shirts, 2 Trees camper mugs, and signed copies of my books. Once again, that's TrueMythsPress.com. Thanks for supporting our work with your purchase. All right. Thank you to our amazing patrons, especially the following: John R., Kaitlyn of Tea with Tolkien, SaberSystems, Melkor27, KG, Emilio P, Jonathan D, Richard K, Robert H, Paul D, Julia, Werty, JoeBagelMan, Matt R, John W, Eugene D, Alaskan Moose 31, Chris B, Daniel S, Cory C, Carolyn S, Emiel K, Seb M, Brian O II, Ms. Anonymous, Andrew T, Redhawk, Shannon S, Brian O I, Zeke F, James L, Chris L, Asya V, Ish of the Hammer, Teresa C, David of Pints with Jack, and Eric B. All right. Thank you all so much for your support, and thank you all to everybody for watching and listening. We will talk at you next time. Bye-bye.